Okay, now for the exciting um, conclusion of the Jacob story. So he's on his way back, and he spends the night across the river just to pray. And as he's praying, all of a sudden, out comes this man from behind the bushes, and they start wrestling. And they apparently wrestle all night long, and to the point where the man toward morning, like he's got him in and he breaks his hip, pops his hip out, and then Jacob swings around and he's got him in a chokehold, and he realizes that this is an angel, that he's been wrestling an angel all night, and he says, you know, promised me that the birthright, came to me the right way, and that God is pleased with me, and finally he says, yes, the birthright is fine, and and you deserve it. And he says, I give you a new name. God gives you a new name, and that name is Israel, he who wrestles with God. And so, it's physically wrestling, but more wrestling with the idea of God. Is God pleased, right? He kind of stole that birthright, and so now he has this birthright that he has to confront his brother Esau. So he goes back to Canaan, and he meets his brother, and there's the expectation that there's huge conflict, but Esau has is totally okay with his brother and is super excited to see him because God has blessed Esau as well. So that's kind of a happy ending in that regard. So Jacob settles down with his brother. Now, in the stories of this of of Israel, right? We can call him Israel or Jacob. It's interchangeable at this point. So they settle down, and again, they're a big clan, and so the neighboring prince and king invite their whole family, this whole clan, to a feast to kind of welcome them in, kind of get to know what are they about. Well, the prince sees the daughter of Jacob, whose name is Dinah, and he falls madly in love with her, and he's showing her the palace on a private tour, and he can't help himself, and he takes her against her will and rapes her. And this doesn't so the girl comes down in the middle of the feast and runs out of there, and the brothers are all like, by now these brothers are not four, they're all 25-year-old men, most of them, and they're super upset, like what happened. And so when they leave the feast, they'll go back, they hear what happened, are totally angry, and they're thinking about what to do. So the next morning, who shows up but the prince and the king show up at the home of Jacob and these brothers, and they say, "We're sorry for what happened, but the prince really does want to marry, your daughter, and we want to see if we can make this right somehow." The brothers couldn't believe it. They're like, "You got to be kidding me!" But they decide on a plan. And so they say, listen, we'll let you marry Dinah, you know, as long as all of the men in your city, including you and the prince, you all get circumcised. Because this was the covenant, part of the covenant was that all males were to be circumcised. And hopefully you know what that means, and I don't have to explain it to you because you're in college and you could look it up if you really don't know. And anyway, so this is just talking a little bit about circumcision a little bit. Now, for us, if there's a reason why infants are circumcised, because the nerve endings in that particular region are not as developed as infants, so it does not hurt. But if a grown man were to go and get circumcised, even with the medications that we have in today's medicine, it would be like a week in the hospital in pain. So back then, this was on your bed for like a week, just writhing in pain. Right? This was terrible. But the prince and the king and all of the men go ahead and do this. On the night after they circumcise all the men of the city, the brothers of the brothers, the sons of Israel, the sons of Jacob, go into the city and they just kill all the men. because there's no way they can defend themselves. They're writhing in pain on their beds, and so they butcher everybody. So that's a pretty big revenge story. And Jacob, who knew nothing of this, was so mad at his sons. Like, now we got to move. We can't just stay here. So they had to move. But one thing is that Rachel only has one son, and that's Joseph. And the only other, and she gets pregnant and in childbirth with the second son, whose name is Benjamin, the youngest of the 12. She dies. She dies from childbirth. And so now Jacob had lost the woman of his heart. And the only connection he has to her are these two boys. And so these two boys, and particularly Joseph, are so special to his heart that he even shows that too much. Like, you know how, like, parents say, "Oh, I love all my kids equally." Well, not Jacob. He definitely showed a lot of special attention for Joseph, and this made all the older brothers really angry, and that was kind of a problem. And on top of that, Joseph had this gift to be able to interpret dreams, to be able to understand dreams. But he had a couple dreams of his own that he couldn't. Now, again, this kid's probably 16 at this point. He's like, and he would go to his older brothers who he loved, and he said, "Brothers, I had this dream. Could you please understand it? I was this I was this tall sheet of corn, right? And in front of me were 11 other sheaves of corn, and they all turned and bowed down to mine." Now, the brothers interpreted that as that they were bowing down to this little punk 16-year-old, and that made them upset. They were already upset. Then one day, as you can kind of see with the coat here, um, Jacob came home with this beautiful multicolored coat and gives it to Joseph. Again, this makes the brothers super angry because, again, this is kind of a kingly gift. Colors were a luxury, and for because they had to be dyed, and the different color dyes were more expensive based on what caused the color. And so, if you had a coat that had multicolors, boy, that was an expensive gift. And so this was even worse. And then finally, Joseph goes to his brothers and said, "I had another dream where I was a star, and then there were 11 other stars, and the sun and the moon, and they all bowed down to my star." And the brothers like, "Yeah, that's it." Right? So they came up with a plan. So one day Joseph is in the fields, and he's wandering through, with the sheep, and the brothers come up to him and they take him and they throw him. They rip off his coat, and they throw him in a well to die. And then they rip up the coat, and they dip it in some lamb's blood, and they were planning on taking that back to the father, saying, "Your son is dead," and they could be finished with this, Joseph. And and so the problem is just as they were, it's not a problem, it's good for Joseph. As they were leaving, um, they saw some travelers, some merchants, some Ishmaelites were walking by, and they decided, well, let's not kill him, let's sell him into slavery. And so they sell him to these Ishmaelites, and Ishmaelites take him to Egypt. And so we, in our next video, will see what happens to poor Joseph, who is now a slave in Egypt.